Ladies and gentlemen, independent Americans around the country, around the world, and inside Ukraine, inside Russia, everywhere else that might be listening, we are going to continue to bring you content and focus on the war in Ukraine. This is another special edition of the Ukraine War Report on Independent Americans. And you know, if you're a longtime listener, who we had to bring back. This is the moment to bring back one of our returning champions, one of our most popular guests, the man who's been called Nance himself. The great and powerful Malcolm Nance is back on Independent Americans. Welcome back, sir.
Oh, is that who it was? I was waiting for Sarah Jessica Parker. I mean, we have way better guests than me, bro.
I'm sure she's got lots of opinions of what's going on right now. Maybe she wants to
Good.
join the fight. Shit, it seems like a lot of folks want to join the fight right now. But I'm
Good, I
glad you
like
can make
to
some
ask.
time and break it down. You're just
All right.
back from over there. You've always got a unique insight. There's a lot I want to get to. NATO just said no to the no-fly zone. We got vets joining the International Legion. Lindsey Graham says we should kill Putin. But you are always in the middle of all of it. So let me ask you, as I always do, where are you now? And how are you?
Well, I'm fine. I've been back in the United States 6 days. I just spent a month in Ukraine. I left by sheer chance, and some analysis of the tea leaves, that I left 6 hours before the airstrike decimated the airports in that country. So I got out on the last Lufthansa flight to Frankfurt. And
And
now
you're
I'm back
back
in
in
the
the U.S.
States.
now.
Yeah, I'm in upstate
And,
New York.
and how does that feel to have been in Ukraine 6 days ago and now be in upstate New York? I mean, that's got to be kind of a mind fuck.
It is. It's very weird. And you know the feeling when you come home from a deployment. This one wasn't a real intense deployment because for the month that I was in Ukraine, although I knew an invasion was coming, I was there specifically with our terror analysis, our think tank Tapestry, which we study asymmetric warfare. And there was nothing was going to be more asymmetric than the Russian invasion of Ukraine with 77% of its army surrounding that nation. So one of the things that I wanted to do, because I'm a real field intelligence guy, you can't talk about it, you can't comment on it, no matter how much combat experience you have. And as you know, I took part in three major invasions, and 5 combat actions total, ground combat. Well, that's not true. One of them was naval combat, but we did wipe out an Iranian warship. So I do have some experience in regard to land warfare. I've been to destroyed European cities, European capitals, Sarajevo, during the Bosnian Serbian wars. So I had some experience in this regard. When I arrived in Kyiv, I expected to see a gray concrete block, Eastern European, Russian-built city. That is not what I saw. I saw a very modern European, Western European city that had a relatively high level of wealth in the capital, even though Ukraine has second lowest GDP in Europe. They live within that GDP, a middle class lifestyle. And I saw that in every location that I was in, and whether it was a village, they had the satcom, they had the nice gardens, they had the fences. There was no trash on the streets. Look, if any of you have ever been to Ireland, Ireland's a beautiful country, but don't look off the edge of the roads. Everyone dumps all of their trash and garbage there. I rode a horse there for 2 weeks, so I was like, I can't believe Ireland is so dirty. But Ukraine is not like that. It is a beautiful, clean country. The capital was very cosmopolitan. The Louis Vuitton was one of the largest I had ever seen. And I couldn't believe that the Russians were planning specifically to destroy 77 years of rebuilding that had happened since the end of World War II. So I went there. We analyzed the Russian order of battle. We took an office. We mapped out the Russian order of battle. And then what we did was we drove all of the major roads that we predicted the invasion routes would have to take. Kyiv to Chernihiv, Chernihiv to the border, Chernihiv to Sumy, out towards Zhytomyr, and the places where they're fighting right now, Hostomel, where the Antonov aircraft factory is, that had I saw the world's largest transport in its hangar just before it was destroyed by Russian special forces, the Mirya. So, and then we evaluated all of the evacuation routes out west and to the southwest and to the south. And I also went with the Ukrainian army to Donetsk, to Adovitsa, to interview the combat commanders out there. And I had a meeting and a selfie with the commander of all Ukrainian land forces, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I really got an in-depth view of the ground, the lay of the land, the cities, the villages, the bridges, all of the infrastructure.
That's exactly why I wanted you on the show. I want to build on that understanding, but I also want to pull it out because you and I have had a number of conversations on my show, and we have predicted many of the things that were to come. Right? Our interactions with Iran, the insurrection, the domestic insurgency. You know, you and I think, are part of a group of people who have been ahead of the curve, who haven't been surprised by the things that are happening. You know, I have viewed us at war with Russia for a while now. You know, I think when you're waging cyber attacks, when you're attacking an election, in my view, that is a new definition of war, and our definitions and our structures haven't caught up to the modern reality. I have considered Putin an enemy for a long time. The world has now woken up to this reality. I want to ask you a very straightforward question that I also asked Bianca Golodriga in our last episode. Malcolm, are we already in World War III?
I'm not one of the people that believe that. I think what's happening here is there's a plan. It's in Putin's mind. No one knows what it is. We don't know whether he is now operating under a mental defect. People that I met in Ukraine, some of whom knew Vladimir Putin personally, back when he was a young president, and one guy knew him when he was prime minister and had just transitioned from the director of Russian intelligence under Boris Yeltsin. And then someone put me in touch with a scholar from Finland who knew who Putin would consult with. And almost to a person, they said that since the beginning of the COVID pandemic, he's been like insanely paranoid. First of COVID, which doesn't speak well of the Sputnik vaccine, right? Right. You know, the president of your own country doesn't even trust your own vaccine. You know, he went and got AstraZeneca or Pfizer with triple boost. So, the big giant 40-foot long table that if you're not vaccinated or you won't take a COVID test, you can't come within literally, 40, 50 feet of him. And then when you're with him and you have been vaccinated and you aren't testing negative, you're still got to sit 8 to 10 feet away from him. It's bizarre behavior, but he lives in this little bubble now. And the problem that we have is he believes whatever is happening in that bubble. And that leads us to why no one can understand what he's doing. There is nothing successfully imperial about this. People are saying, oh, he's trying to recreate imperial Russia. Really? Which czar? Because Tsar Nicholas I, whose philosophy was monarchy, orthodoxy, nationality, built churches, built roads, built infrastructure, built bridges. Putin's not doing that. It's certainly not Peter the Great, who went by foot and worked in European and British shipyards to essentially a technology spy so that he could build a greater navy and built the city of St. Petersburg and all these other things. We actually had this discussion one night over drinks, of course. What will be Vladimir Putin have named after him? Nothing. There won't be a Vladimirsburg. There won't be, a Putinetsk or some, maybe there will be a men's outhouse. He's got the Trump effect. No one now will ever say Vladimir Putin did anything for Russia because this hasn't reestablished their greatness. And I've seen their greatness. In the middle of Kyiv, a little greatness is the giant, 300-400 foot statue of Rodina Mat, which is the giant, statue of the woman holding a sword and the Soviet shield in the left hand. By the way, the shield, you can go up and that is actually an observation deck. It's
Hmm.
that big. And that was built by Leonid Brezhnev, and it's known as Brezhnev's daughter. Okay, the Ukrainians hate the Soviet crest on it, but they built something. All the
Right.
bridges were reconstructed. Putin has done none of this. And the
So,
question is, what's in his crazy mind? What's his legacy?
well, so let's know. We know that his legacy will be destruction, and
Yeah.
the question is what level of destruction. So, I really, I expanded on this in the last podcast. I think that the fight is upon us, and it is now, before the world to figure out how we engage in it, how we can support our allies, how we can support Ukraine, how we can save as many civilians as possible. The issue that's front and center right now is a no-fly zone. Right, the Ukrainians are calling for it. I understand that. If I were there, I'd be asking for it too. The common groupthink has been you can't enforce a no-fly zone because it'll start World War III, which is, in my view, exactly what Putin wants to do to keep us from engaging. But my question is, there seems to be a lack of creativity. There's also an overestimation on the part of the U.S. and NATO that we can control everything. So what is stopping Poland from acting independently? And what are our options? If people say no to a no-fly zone, what do you think we can do to protect our Ukrainian allies on the ground beyond what we're doing right now, beyond standing on the borders and watching Ukraine become a parking lot?
Well,
What can we be doing? What should we be doing that we're not doing now, whether it's a no-fly zone or something else?
well, here's a little controversy, which I like to stir up from time to time. I'm one of the few analysts, if now the only analyst, national security analyst in media, that believes that Ukraine can actually win this battle.
I'm with you on that. I'm with
When
you
you
on that.
look at the flows of Russian forces, don't look at Clint Watts on the big board with the arrows in the red terrain of occupied terrain. None of that is true. Here's what's true, because I've driven those roads. Okay, and there's, by the way, Ukraine, greatest greatest highway gas station convenience stores on the planet, just bar none. They are like little internet. They're like little
Eastern Europe has those for sure. Yeah,
they're like
yeah,
little Whole Foods. Oh no, they're way better than the German ones.
yeah, yeah.
No, because they have boatloads of liquor in them from every
Right,
country in
right.
Europe. You can get, I'm not joking, French brie, and in the same booth, French brie, Spanish or Italian bread, Armenian canned cooked ostrich, okay, and a can of horse meat from Azerbaijan.
Ooh,
So,
yummy,
and,
yummy.
and espresso, Jack Daniels, they have cases of, they actually have a display of Jack Daniels tied together with a 6-pack of Coke.
But you think they can? Let's take it back. You think they can win? And this is the point I think is important, right?
The reason I'm explaining the gas station system is because those gas stations, which are everywhere along the invasion routes, had to have been one of the strategic objectives of the Russians, which is why their follow-on logistics forces are weak, apparently very weak, why vehicles are running out of fuel. The Ukrainians took all the diesel, knowing the Russian tanks aren't running on petrol, right? And for the most part, the lines of invasion have all of these crossroads that they must seize. And as you get further and further down each line of invasion, you're stretching out. Let me tell you another thing. 2 weeks ago today, I was driving on the highways and it was 52 degrees Fahrenheit. I couldn't believe it. The temperatures in upstate New York and Albany, New York, were 20 degrees colder than Ukraine in winter. It was unbelievable, the temperatures. I mean, where it should have been 10 degrees, it was 35. The entirety of that country melted and it turned into a mud pit. We got off the road one time in a Prado and the tires were 6 inches deep in mud. And we could barely get out of that. Imagine a 60-ton T-80 main battle tank. And we've already seen the photographs. They've gone all the way up to the top of the hull in mud. And then an artillery piece was trying to tow it out. It got stuck in mud. They had to abandon it. So Ukraine, Mother Nature itself is now beating them. Here's where the Russian forces are. only on the tarmac roads. And if it's not in a straight line down that tarmac road, they don't control it. So those lines, as they pierce into Ukraine, are completely and utterly vulnerable to counterattack from the rear in maneuver warfare. That is letting your enemy flow by you. You take your elements, go right and left, and you know the terrain. You know that the road sign doesn't say actually mean go F yourself 25 kilometers, which is what they've changed the road signs to say.
Right.
Right. And then you can come around their rear and tear them up. The Ukrainians gave a hint yesterday that this is what they were doing, was that these avenues of attack, that these approaches may have actually been sort of deliberate. They said the Ukrainian army will now shift from defense to counterattack. And I thought that's a very interesting statement to make when, if you watch national news media, the entire country is on the edge of collapse. Not even true. Russia occupies perhaps 20% of the highways that lead into Ukraine, not the actual territory of Ukraine. Some cities, yes, they got Melitopol. Yes, they got Kherson. I predicted those would fall in the first 24 hours.
So what do we do, Malcolm? If they're being pulled in and they're vulnerable in the rear, and they still have air assets that are blowing up civilians, what do you think should be done by either the U.S. or independent nations? How do we help these people?
Well, first off, the European Union has already set the pace, saying that they would actually give them weapons, equipment in the tens of billions of dollars. There are Ukrainian pilots in Poland right now checking out and getting ready to fly over the MiG-29s, I believe it's 24 MiG-29s that the Polish Air Force flies F-16s now. So they didn't need these. So they're getting them prepped up. And that is a 50% increase in the Ukrainian Air Force's MiG-29 inventory. And there's other nations are saying that they'll give them the Su-27s and other MiG-29s. Their issue now is getting all the junior pilots qualified and keeping the senior pilots alive.
But are you okay with us just fueling their fighters and us staying on the sidelines and not crossing the border with air assets, with drones, with all the other firepower we have to blow up a convoy that's just sitting there? Are you in that camp where you say we can't cross that line and we need to let them fight it themselves?
No. I'm going to tell you something. When I was out in the Donetsk battlefield, I was there with General Syrskyi, commander of the land forces, right? General Syrskyi made a pretty flat statement to the journalists who were there. He said, people were saying, well, do you want the Americans to come fight with you? And he said, I don't want anyone to send manpower to Ukraine. We have a 250,000 men and women army. We have as many as 500,000 reserves, 100,000 of whom are combat veterans of Donetsk, Afghanistan, and Iraq. Okay, and United Nations missions in sub-Saharan Africa. A lot of people forget that Ukrainians were in Iraq.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, I was there. I remember them. Yeah,
down in Najaf. So, driving T-55s. So he said, what we want is we want a logistics train to sustain our combat effort. We have the manpower. And another thing, the Russians apparently are enjoying abandoning some very advanced surface-to-air missile systems. And the Ukrainians need to establish an immediate recovery, not blow them up. These Pantsir, surface-to-air missile systems that they're capturing whole, drag those things back. The Ukrainian defense industry out in Lviv actually remanufactures tanks and weapons for the Afghan army and the Saudi army. So they need to get these intermediate range ballistic, air defense systems up and running
But they're also begging right now. Zelensky is on TV begging for a no-fly zone.
Yeah, would make things. That would just tilt the balance of the war. However,
it would, right? It would,
now, here's the kicker.
Yeah,
if Poland decides that they are going to do a no-fly zone, the question is, does that mean Poland? Poland itself would have to invoke Article 5 for NATO to come to its assistance. Right. That would be, to them, that would be invading Poland physically. But if you're going to, this is 1939 all over again. I've been saying this for the last month, which means that perhaps it's time for Lend-Lease to be established.
Yeah.
Perhaps it's time. I mean, Poland is doing lend-lease with these MiG-29s,
Yeah.
but
Why can't Poland say, as an example, hey, NATO, we're out for 2 weeks. We're out for 2 weeks. We're going to do our own thing. We're not going to wait till the Russians come into Poland and come into Moldova and come into, we're breaking away. NATO doesn't work for us right now. We're going to fucking hit the Russians. We're going to back the Ukrainians. We're going to tilt the momentum and not let Putin
you
control the
don't have
tempo
to
anymore.
hit the Russians. All they need to do is start flying air combat missions
Great.
west of the M06 highway.
So if you're president and Zelensky calls you and says or he goes to NATO and says I need a no-fly zone, you would grant it for him in some way, right? You would get creative and find a way to get him what he's asking for.
I would ensure that there are enough fighter coverage up there that the Russians would not be able to move beyond Kyiv.
But that's a no.
Now,
You
that
would
doesn't-
not
push-
send in any
you
other
can't
assets.
push that fighter envelope all the way to the Russian border. Here's what I would do. Malcolm Nance, Commander-in-Chief, in consultation with his NATO allies, I would establish an immediate, aggressive, and unlimited use of the Predator drone system on a lend-lease basis with ground pods that are in Ukraine with a Ukrainian pilot and a Ukrainian weapon systems guy. So that aircraft might take off from Mildenhall, or it might take off from Karlsruhe, and it may go on a regular routine armed aerial reconnaissance mission, and then it may be chopped over to an ally, which is military talk for signed off. Then their ground station takes control of that Predator or Reaper, I'm sorry, not a Predator, a Reaper drone with its 16 Hellfire missiles that just happen to be on the airplane, right? Starts flying a mission off around Kiev and slaughters whoever is in its way.
It's just an extension. It's an extension of giving them Stingers and Javelins.
It's
right?
lend-lease.
Yeah.
Right? That aircraft will not land in Frankfurt. That aircraft will now land in Ivano-Frankivsk, or it'll land up in Ternopil, one of these small air bases where you have air cover. It is rearmed, refueled, resent, and goes back and does it. I would do that with, I personally feel I would have been watching for almost 2 weeks, Global Hawk, which is our high altitude, completely persistent, drone that can stay up for weeks at a time.
Yeah.
I would have ground operator or all ground interpretation will not be directly streamed to the United States. It'll stream right down to the Ukrainian command post in wherever, and the Ukrainians will analyze the data as they see it, and then they will use that data as they see it.
And they're asking Israel for the Iron Dome. They want everything. Give me anything I can get to kill the bad guys before they kill me, right?
Iron Dome is not an effective system.
But they're asking for everything, right? They're asking for everything.
Ask for everything. Here's another thing. Why aren't the Turkish just suddenly handing over 30 or 40 of the Bakhtiar drone systems? The problem with that drone is it only carries 2 missiles.
Well, let me ask you.
Reaper is a better idea.
I love getting into the tactical. I love getting into the specific. If folks aren't military people, they may be geeking out over this right now. And this is part of the conversation that actually I want to share, because you're not seeing this on CNN. You're not going to get a deep dive in the way that you're framing and explaining this stuff. But I also want to pull it back and say we're also not cutting off the oil. Right? Biden hasn't prepared America for war footing. He hasn't cut off the oil imports. And a lot of our brothers and sisters who are veterans view our country as not doing enough. They want to join this as a good fight of our time. They view this like 1939. I do personally. I've been open about this. I have 2 kids. I'm here in the U.S., but I think about going. And I know people who are signing up right now at the Ukrainian embassy. They want to go fight. I don't know if you are going to join the fight, but let me ask you this, Malcolm. Our brothers and sister veterans, not just from the U.S., but also from Germany, from Israel, from other places, are joining the International Legion. Zelensky has also said, come fight with us. Join the fight. We'll train you up. We'll give you a Ukrainian uniform. I think this is a very big story for a number of reasons. One, because it will change the dynamic of how the American public views this war. One American troop gets snatched, gets killed. It changes our skin in the game in a way we may not have anticipated.
We already.
Let me ask you. Let me get to the question if I can. So, when you were there,
in Russia, there's American citizens in Russia that they said they may imprison or not allow to leave.
That's what I'm trying to get ahead of this in a way that I don't think Biden has, right? I don't think Biden and the White
Well,
House
I
have
think
leveled
Biden
with the
has
American.
his problem is his staff.
Right.
His, you
But
know,
let me get to the question I really want to get to is when you were
sure.
there,
Yes.
did you see American veterans already on the ground? What is
No.
your read on how many veterans you think will go? And how does that change the dynamic when a bunch of dudes from the 82nd Airborne go? And they don't all want to be door kickers. Some of them are medics. Some of them want to help fix tanks. Some of them want to help put fuel in because we're really good at logistics, right? So all these
Well,
men and women that are joining, can you talk about that point of this specifically?
yeah,
Because I think it's a big story right now.
I had some deep dives with the Ukrainian government over the proposed Legion. And they were not, let me tell you something, until the moment those bombs struck, none of this was thought about. Although the Ukrainian army thought about it. And there were a few people who were preparing, for the militia organizations, the territorial brigades, to stand up. And they were giving training around the city. But for the most part, it was going to be open up the weapons lockers, take what you want, go out in the street, and you will organize into local organizations. That's one thing, the territorial home guards that are just what we call MWRs, right? Men with rifles. And they've got no training. Some of them may have been conscripts in the Soviet era, but for the most part, they're out just cool digging, every one body in its way. Now, they are organized now into territorial battalions in name, right? They're sort of like ISIS or Al Qaeda brigades, right? 6 guys in a 6-pack equals a battalion. Mm-hmm. So, but the Ukrainians are very determined people. Now, let's talk about the International Brigade, which I know something about. And the methodology for getting into it is not just walking over there. You got to go to an embassy. You got to be cleared by the defense attaché. You had to have had previous experience. My issue is that it's sort of being done willy-nilly because the International Legion is being considered a territorial home guard unit, which means that you're not going to be operating as a group of Americans. You're going to be operating as a gaggle of MWRs with experience. And what they need to form a national level infrastructure that breaks you down by language, that breaks you down by combat experience, and doesn't make you a territorial. I personally have said that the Legion itself needs to be a flying squad once they've proven themselves. So they've got to be brought up. They should be paralleled, with a unit that's on the front line. You let them work their way into it, get a little, reorient themselves to the loud noises that they were used to in Iraq and Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of experience that's missing here that the Ukrainians haven't quite tapped into yet. And that is that there is no infrastructure for a guerrilla war. And they are going to have a guerrilla war. In fact, that guerrilla war is happening right now. If you saw I don't know if any of your viewers saw the video of where there were 4 tanks there were 4 tanks next to each other, and a bunch of locals looted all of these weapons trucks, just couldn't even get their minivan filled, off the ground with it, and then set fire to these tanks, which is great. But what they need to do is when you find an abandoned tank, call us, we'll get tank wreckers out there, and we'll put 4 tanks in the Ukrainian army inventory.
Right.
So, This is what happens when you have MWRs, men with rifles. They just go, oh, well, there's tanks. Let me do something about that. Throw a Molotov down it. Maybe we needed all that main gun ammunition, right? Maybe we needed to recover that. Maybe. That guerrilla war is started, but it needs to be organized into a maquis, right? Like the French.
Yeah, I mean, that's the part of this now that I think a lot of Americans assume, and I think the White House assumes, that they can control a whole lot more than they can. Right. And especially in the early phases of this, it's going to be more messy and more costly and more bloody than I think most people, at least in this country, are ready for. The Ukrainians have been fighting the Russians for years. I think they're grounded in that. And I think that's where Biden had a 9/11 moment. He didn't tell the American people this is going to be long, this is going to be hard, but it's going to be worth it. He was kind of like Bush after 9/11 saying, go shopping, everything's going to be okay. But others are answering the call. So I think we're quickly going to be at a point where the New York Times reports in a couple weeks to X thousand American veterans are now in the fight.
I don't believe that at all. Okay. Because first off, You know, it's not just something you can just up and do. I think a lot of people are talking.
Yeah.
Zelensky said 16,000 people. He's correct. 16,000 Ukrainians have returned home
Right.
to fight. There
Right.
might be a few hundred. Here's how the Ukrainian armed forces existed 2 weeks ago. If you were a foreigner, you had to come in, you had to join on a 4-year contract in Ukrainian forces. I think we've got a guy right now. I don't know whether he's online anymore, but his name was Ukrainian Jundi, and which is Arabic for soldier. And he was surrounded in Mariupol yesterday. And he said, "Hey, I'm going to be offline. We're surrounded. We're taking heavy fire." And he's British, but he was a Ukrainian Marine, who lived there and was in the forces. The guys who are going to be coming now again they're in the International Legion, are going to be a disparate group of people who, if you throw them in 1 and 2, you're going to take casualties. And this is why guys who are thinking about it, okay, have your acts together. Just because they fly you over there doesn't mean that you're going to be doing what you think you're going to be doing.
Right.
And I know there's already some special forces guys over there running humanitarian stuff at the border. This is bigger than all of that. This isn't like a brigade of 82nd, right? 4,800 men have all decided to go as a body. No, this is, drips and drabs. And you got to remember that on the conservative side of this ledger, they're pro-Putin. And what I think the Ukrainians are going to have to be a little careful about is counterintelligence. There's already an American who has been over in Russia for years now, who went out with the Russian army and is broadcasting propaganda videos for Vladimir Putin about how they're going to kill the Ukrainian Nazis and all this stuff. The Ukrainians can't afford to have somebody like that on TV, yahooing, going, "I'm out here just to kill Russians."
I think that's the bigger part of this, is the propaganda war, right? Like, Zelensky would love to have a couple American guys like you with 1 million Twitter followers that can also amplify messages, right? This can be symbolic on both sides. You can be in a really shitty situation where we've got a high-profile American that gets killed or captured, right? I keep saying that there could be a Pat Tillman type moment, right? Where, in my view, Pat Tillman was the first American that most Americans felt like they knew who died in Afghanistan. So we could have a shitty Jessica Lynch situation. Some, Yahoo from the Alabama National Guard goes in there and gets captured, right? But on the flip side, I think Zelensky could use this to galvanize more American support, more Western support. They may be small in numbers, but they may be powerful symbolically. And what I want to ask you is, and I want to get to the where we always go with you, which is what comes next. And today, Lindsey Graham made an open call in media to people inside Russia saying, take out Putin. And I will say flat out, I don't think this ends until Putin is dead or in jail. If we beat him now and he lives to fight another day, he'll keep coming. He may be playing the long game where he wants to bog us down in Ukraine and wait till the congressional elections and wait till Biden's gone and wait till Trump comes back and has a different scenario. But let me ask you this. Is there a way this ends without Putin dead?
Well, that has to be an option. That's what diplomacy is about. We're not here for regime change, and we can't make that decision. We can't. No one's,
But from internal too, I should specify. Like, there's also
a movie, right?
The most likely way for him to be overthrown is likely from the inside, and I think that's what a lot of people are hoping
I've actually
for, right?
said this on air, not on television, definitely on radio. That is incumbent upon that if Vladimir Putin shows more instability to where he really orders people to use nuclear weapons, or he readies tactical nuclear weapons, as let's say the Ukrainians actually successfully carry out, a battle of Yavin, right? That where they come around and just boom, numerically superior forces suddenly cut off and being destroyed. And his army is starting to go away. The cream of the technology of the Russian army starts getting wiped out. What does he do? What does he go to 1? Does he go to 1 kilogram? Does he go to 1 kiloton, 5 kiloton tactical nuclear weapon and just eliminates a city as a warning? At that point, that famous line from that was spoken to Captain Willard in the movie Apocalypse Now, terminate the colonel's command.
Yeah.
that has to be incumbent upon the chain of command around him. Because when you detonate a nuclear weapon, now you're talking about your kids are going to be eating the remnants of that nuclear weapon the next morning. It goes over everything, goes all around the world, gets in the stratosphere and comes down. And
Yeah,
it's
it's
in
just I find it strange that the American public is so quick to say, let's take out Gaddafi, let's take out Saddam, but there's a different set of rules in this scenario, and that's why I think to Putin's advantage, right?
6,500 atomic bomb rule.
Yeah, yeah. But I do think that for folks to assume Putin won't do anything because of something is the flaw. Like, we have to plan for everything he could do, and as a military planner, hope is not a plan. You plan for the most dangerous course of action, and the most dangerous course of action right now, in the same way it was on January 6th, is Trump had access to nukes, right? And politically, we had to remove him. We had to ensure he relinquished power. That was a conversation happening in this country, and I think fueling that conversation in Russia is something we should be doing, right? That doesn't mean we're calling for an assassination, although that's something people will call for too, and we should have a conversation about it, I think, and not be afraid to have that conversation, because we've had it so many other times before. I don't think Russia stops until he's gone, and a couple levels down are gone. And there is a scenario that I think you're laying out and others are starting to understand, that we don't have to just save Ukraine. We can defeat Russia in Ukraine and change the course of history here. This is why, in my view, it is 1939. We can end up in a much better place. It might take us 10 years, it might take us 20 years, but we might no longer have a dictator with nukes in Russia. And that's where I feel like the president, especially in our country, hasn't laid that out for people. He just keeps kicking the can down the road. And that's how we got here.
President of the United States doesn't control the world, man. You can't put that on him. I mean, and look, this isn't Donald Trump. This is a competent president who actually thinks through what's going on. Trump was literally Putin's puppy. He was a subordinate.
But do you think that Biden is really leveled with the American people?
Yeah, he's already leveled with the American people. It's just that, there's just only so much you can do. We are in a boom economy, but 57% of America thinks we're in a recession, because we have a propaganda system. We have 3 channels: OAN, Newsmax,
and Fox,
that claim America's in a recession. Donald Trump, when he left office, had what, 32,000 on the stock market? It's almost nearing 40,000. These things are different. We are living in a world where facts no longer matter, and no matter how good it feels, we insist that it doesn't feel good, because we base it on what? The price of gas today? Well, Biden said that he has now convinced most of the free world to open their petroleum reserves, and that there could be an economic boom for the United States in natural gas, in that Germany is now going to build 3 natural gas receiving spots, and the only 2 places that will be supplying it is the United States and Qatar. So, there is a possibility, and a friend of mine said this to me about Germany the other day. A week ago, we were anti-nuke, leaning towards Russia, big on natural gas, and didn't think we should get involved with weapons. Today, we want to give them all the weapons they can carry. We want to cut our dependence on natural gas to Russia. And, and we are more than willing to see this thing, to stand with NATO. So the world changes on a dime. The problem is Americans, and I know this is independent media, but Americans are a little lazy, and they're a little self-centered, and they are a little too enmeshed in their comfort. I was over there, I had a grand old time. Now everything that I saw, coffee houses, kids going to school, walks around Ternopil Lake, that's gone. That's done. People are now dying in very, very large numbers. And I'm afraid for the Afghans who were my neighbors in my hotel. Little Muhammad, this kid that learned how to open my hotel room door all the time. They moved from Afghanistan. They're in Kyiv. And now they have to become second refugees.
So let me ask you the question, right? And I think in a lot of areas we're in heated agreement. In some areas we disagree. I think that Biden did not prepare the country for what could be a long slog, for what could be mass casualties. And maybe he's got, I'm
Wait,
sure
wait,
there's
wait.
plenty of things that they're
Who's
working on.
wait?
Let me finish if I
Prepared
can.
whom? For Ukraine's mass casualties or American?
No, Ukraine's mass casualties. I don't think the American public until now
He was spinning
understands.
left and right. Come on.
But let me finish if I can. So I don't think you see it's shifting already, right? Switzerland sending weapons, Germany changing the way they operate. This is tipping in a way that it hadn't before, right? Even today, now people are re-examining whether or not you can enforce a no-fly zone. The country is moving pretty quickly, I think. But they still don't want war. And the question for the rest of the world is, will America fight anymore? It seems like if you look at Afghanistan and now you look at Ukraine, we're going to stand on the sidelines. We're going to keep our arms length. We're not going to pay for it in blood. We will do some economic sanctions, extreme economic sanctions, but we won't cut off the oil. Maybe that is coming soon. But let me ask you to be Nostradamus. Where does this go? Where are we a year from now? Be predictive, not just analytical, but be predictive and tell us where you think this goes.
There's only one way that Russia can win this war, and that's if Putin does a national mobilization of conscripts, calls up 1 million people, right? And with what little gains that he has right now, he floods that country with just rifles. Rifles. By the way, we're now entering, we thought it was bad 2 weeks ago. We are now just entering the mud season, which is for the next 2 months, you cannot put your foot on dirt. You'll go down to your knee, right? And then the planting season comes, then the summer harvest, blah, 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 blah. So if Putin does that, he has a chance of occupying parts of the country. I'm telling you right now, he cannot, with the resources he has right now, he can't destroy the Ukrainian army. He can't cut the army. He can't even cut the country in half, even though all these analysts are saying he's doing it. He doesn't. He doesn't have the combat flow. He doesn't have the logistics. So what are you going to get? You're going to get a Ukrainian force that over time is going to shift from just frontline, bombs, guns, and helicopter rides to an insurgent force. And they are going to become, even though they're still wearing their uniforms, their primary job in the day will be pulling watches, overwatches, and ambushes on Russian convoys, and their night job will be planting improvised explosive devices and 1 kilometer long daisy chain artillery shells. And they will let the Russians understand what happened to America for 20 years in a way that Russians will not even be able to sustain the combat forces that are in Ukraine. Because what was the most dangerous thing you and I could ever do in Iraq or Afghanistan? Get in a vehicle.
Drive. No,
just getting in it.
Yeah.
When you got in it, it could be, an anti-tank guided missile could be.
So what you're saying is this goes, and in your view, this becomes Afghanistan for Russia, and that could last for 1 year, 2 years, or it could be like our Afghanistan and last for 20 years. And we've got a new line, a new Berlin Wall, and it's the barrier between Ukraine and Europe. And this is what happens for a generation until Putin dies of old age. What happens? That's pretty much it, right?
Or lead poisoning. But I think that this won't go longer than a year. Unless Putin decides he is going total war.
And then what? And then he pulls out? He says, I give up. I'm giving you back Ukraine?
I don't think he'll pull out. I actually think the Ukrainians will have enough throw power. Again, when you bring a combat unit forward, right? And you go into that little corral, you go into that little 360 defensive position there, because you're still mobile force. You're not occupying a compound, okay?
Right.
And you still got to sit at the crossroads in your tank, pulling shifts 24/7 so that there's heavy armor on the road, right? You have to survive that night, okay? And when that night they wake up and they go, checkpoint 1 and 3, both tanks were blown up and their turrets went sky high and everybody was killed. And now we got to fall back 1 or 3 kilometers to the next crossroads. That's how they progress. They inch the ball 1 foot at a time, and there's no 4th down for the Ukrainian army. You make it, we have this joke about Our Lady of Javelin, right? And Saint Enlaw. Now we have, the Friar of Panzerfaust 3 is coming because the Germans just gave him 1,000 Panzerfaust. And
What you're talking about is tank killers, right? We're talking about the
tank
weapons that come in, and these are
And
going to be.
I remember the Canadian number: 24,500 M72 Law A1 rockets. 24,000 Law rockets. That's a light anti-tank rocket, tube rocket. Everyone's an anti-tanker now.
Right.
No one's a shooter. Everyone, their day job will be making tea. Their night job will be destroying tanks. There are right now more javelins than there are tanks in the Russian inventory.
So I'm gonna try to wrap it up there and say, look, I think you have been accurate in most of your predictions for, I don't know, the last decade or two. This show has continued to try to keep people ahead of the curve and also challenge the conventional wisdom, because 2 weeks ago everybody said Putin was going to roll and Ukraine was going to fall and this was going to be over, and part of what I frankly think you and I and others in this media space have been trying to do is disrupt this flow, disrupt the common knowledge, disrupt the groupthink, because they've been wrong about Afghanistan, they were wrong about Iraq, they're wrong now, and we're not right all the time either, but busting up this groupthink that's happening, and I think misinforming the American people and not serving us well is a part of why I am so concerned about the bigger picture. I think NATO is in many ways obsolete. I think Congress has shown us that they're, in many ways not able to adapt. All of our existing structures have not evolved for the times, and that includes the media. And that's why I have done what I'm doing now, and this is my way to support the fight. And anybody listening in Ukraine knows that I stand with Ukraine, and I will say down with Putin, and I will say glory to Ukraine, and I hope others will echo that, and that the fighters in Ukraine hear me and you and other Americans who are standing with them in any way we can. You're going to continue to do that. And I want to thank you for that, because it is a public service. It's a global service. And you don't have to agree with us all the time, but I think we're on the side of good. And that's been true fighting enemies, foreign and domestic. And we got our own problems in the days to come. But Malcolm, you've been intrepid. You've been tenacious. You've been there, which is really, really important. And I hope that folks will look at whatever you put out every day on Twitter and in the weeks to come, because I know you've got more to share about your time over there, man.
All right. Well, thanks. It's great to be here, and Slava Ukraine.
Slava Ukraine. Thank you, man. How do you say stay vigilant in Ukraine? We'll say Slava Ukraine.
F you, Putin.
Yeah, and fuck you, Putin. Absolutely. Thank you, my friend.
All right. Take care.